Before Paperspace came to AutoCAD, we had to draw in what was called model space. Well, it's still called that too, and we still draw in it all the time. But back then, if the scale of your drawing changed, you had to change what's called the LT scale setting, which is short for line type scale setting. This scaled your line type so that your dashed lines would show up as dashed lines. Otherwise, the dashes would be so small that they look like solid lines. However, now that we have Paperspace and viewports, we don't need to change the LT scale globally anymore. We can leave it set to 1, and each viewport will change the LT scale automatically according to the viewport scale. That being said, you still have the option of changing the LT scale per object. That means you can override the global setting and force an object to scale its line type according to your settings. I advise against this though, but you still can do it, and there are times that it will be helpful. Sometimes it's just not right, and it's not doing it exactly the way you want it to, and it's a quick, easy change. A lot of times I find that using the fence line type that comes with AutoCAD is just way too big, and so I have to adjust it. Let's open up a file to look at what I'm talking about here. Because to be honest, you can go through your life of using AutoCAD now and never change the LT scale whatsoever, assuming that all the files you are working in have it set to a factor of 1. Let's open up the Movie House file. Click Open. And here we go. Now we have some line types here. Most of these are solid. Now this line type here is a footing, and it has some dashes in it. Now you can see here that it looks like a solid line, though it isn't. Our scale for this is essentially set at 1 to 1. But if I change it at 1/4 inch equals a foot and do a regen, you can see that the line type shows up. It's dashed. Now I didn't have to change my line type scale because I changed the annotative scale in here. So what you want to do is leave everything at a 1 to 1 type scale in model space. Leave your LT scale, which is just literally LT scale, press enter, leave it set to 1. Now if I change that to say 48, press enter, that's like changing the scale of my drawing. And so it shows everything the way you probably want to see it when you print out your file. But if I come to this Dimensions tab here in Paperspace, and I look in here, and now I see that this line looks solid. Now the scale of my viewport here is at 1/8 inch equals a foot. And my LT scale is keeping this scaled at being just a continuous line. LT scale will scale it regardless of the viewport scale, scaling your line type factor that is, and so that it makes it bigger or smaller. So in this case, it's really messing stuff up. So let's go back to LT scale and let's set it to 1. And it fixes it. If I double click in this viewport to activate it and I unlock my viewport, I click here, let's change the scale from 1/8 to 1/16. I do that. Let's do a regen. And we'll see now the dashes are the exact same length on my paper. So if I measure them here in Paperspace, I can't really snap to them. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball it, and I just want to get a general idea. They look like they're about 1/4 inch. So let's go back into the viewport here, and we're going to switch it back to 1/8 inch. Let's lock it. Go back to Paperspace. Refresh my screen, get my distance command in here, and let's do a quick measurement here. And you see it's still at about 1/4 inch. So my dashes are defined by the line type in my drawing. And they're defined to be this big when you print them out in Paperspace. Now I can change that through a couple of different ways. I can change it by LT scale. I can change it by the object LT scale. So for example, if I change my LT scale now, it's at 1. And if I change it to, 2, that increases the length by a factor of 2 of my dashes. Now I can keep changing that. I can go up to 4. See, they keep getting bigger and bigger. And I can even go less. If I go like 0.5, it makes them shorter. So the smaller the number, the shorter the dashes are going to be. The larger the number, the larger the dashes are going to be. And it's a scale factor. So keep that in mind. Go back to LT scale, change it to 1, press enter. Now I'm going to show you an example of that fence line. So if I change this object here and I change the line type from by layer, and let's load something in. Well, I can't really load it in from here, but if I change line type, press enter, let's load in my line type that I want, hit the load button, and I want the fence. So I'm going to hit the F button, go to fence line 2, click OK, and now it's in here. It's basically a line with a square, and just at a set increment. Come back into paper space, and then into model space here, I'm going to select the footing line, and then I'm going to change it to a fence line setting. Now, as you can see, that fence is quite large. Each pole is about as big as its chair, so that's not how I want to represent it in this drawing. So I'm going to select the object, and I'm going to reduce that by half. So I'm going to set it to 0.5. That doesn't affect anything else in my file, only this line. It's an override. It's an object override, just like color, transparency, etc. Now, if I change the LT scale globally, or meaning for the drawing, it's still going to affect it. But it's applying my LT scale and the line type scale for that object. So it's all confused. This is a great way to really mess up a drawing, is to start changing line type scale by object and globally. That's why it's best to leave this all alone. Leave the LT scale set to 1. And then if you need something to be overridden, you'll change it. Now, the LT scale is a little bit different than things like color, because I can set a layer to a certain color, and those objects on that layer, like these chairs, will all be magenta. But then if I change the global color to something else, these aren't affected. I can change those objects to a specific color, but I can't override it. LT scale is different. I can change the LT scale of an object, and I can change the LT scale of a drawing, and that will affect each other, or at least that object that's being drawn. So you can really get confused and really display your objects poorly or lose control of it because you have all these settings tweaked. In this case, keep it simple, keep everything set to 1, and let the viewport scale your line types for you. If your dashes are too long or too short, there are several different line types in there, dashes, phantom lines, etc., that have them already pre-made where the dashes are a little longer or a little shorter or at normal length. So try using one of those, or maybe even consider creating your own custom line type if that's really what you need to do. It's better than changing that setting because that can really mess stuff up. So just be careful and be aware of them, but have fun.